Welcome back to the London Futurist podcast. This is the second episode in which we discuss the upcoming Global AI Safety Summit taking place on the 1st and 2nd of November at Bletchley Park in England. We're delighted to have as our guest today one of the 100 or so people who will attend that summit, Connor Leahy, a German-American AI researcher and entrepreneur. In 2020, he co-founded Eleuther AI, a non-profit research institute which has helped develop a number of open-source models, including Stable Diffusion. 2 years later, he co-founded Conjecture, which aims to scale AI alignment research. Conjecture is a for-profit company, but the focus is still very much on figuring out how to ensure that the arrival of superintelligence is beneficial to humanity rather than disastrous. Connor, welcome to the London Futurist podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for joining us, Connor.
So Connor, let's start at the beginning. How did you become interested in the subject of existential risk from AI?
When I was pretty young, I was like 8 or something, or even younger, I realized that the world has many problems. And I thought, well, that sucks. How do I fix that? I was always like, well, how do I fix all the problems? There's so many of them. I mean, they're all awful. I have to solve all of them. So what can I do to solve at least as many of them as possible? And so my teens, I was thinking should I do medicine? No. Should I do biology? Nah. Chemistry? Physics? Mathematics? I was trying to find the bigger and bigger things to work on. And ultimately kind of loop back around where I was like, well, what does all of science and all of problem solving have in common? Intelligence. So the thing I should do is just solve intelligence, because then I can automate science and then I can solve all the problems. So I'll just go do that. So yeah, my teens got really into futurism, thinking about AI, Kurzweil type stuff and stuff like that. Back then, quite over-optimistic and kind of idealistic about, technology is just good. What could go wrong? And then eventually, in my late teens and early 20s, I stumbled upon some of the writings from various people about existential risks, like Bostrom and Eleuther and stuff like this. And I was just like, oh, obviously, this is the actual problem. The problem of AGI and of superintelligence is not how to build it, it's how to control it. This is much harder, and this is the problem that actually needs to get solved to solve problems.
Sounds like you're a bit similar to Demis, Hassabis, and DeepMind, because they also had the two-stage mission of, 1, solve intelligence, and with intelligence, solve everything else.
It was a common theme, I feel, for many people that were thinking about AI, back in those days at least.
Yeah, there's a journey. You discover Ray Kurzweil and you think, wow, that's wonderful. And then you think, hang on a minute, I can see a few things how this could go wrong. Some people get stuck at the Kurzweil stage. Some people get stuck at the it could go wrong stage. And it often seems to me that there's kind of a balance between the two. But let's just talk a bit about Conjecture. What is Conjecture trying to do about these risks? And how does Conjecture differ from Eleuther AI? I apologize if I've mispronounced that.
No, you got it right. All of this comes from ultimately my whole lifelong thing. I want the future to go well. My dedication to AGI and AI in particular is kind of instrumental, is that ultimately I want everyone to be okay. I don't want people being sick. I don't like people being in pain. I don't like all these terrible things happening. I want us to have great abundance and art and beauty and all these wonderful things, as everyone else, I think, does. And I'm very pragmatic about that. I don't care how to achieve that, as long as it doesn't violate ethical constraints, which are extremely important. So the most important problem I identified is working on AI and alignment. And back in the day, when I first got into deep learning, 2014, 2015 or something like that, I got pretty deeply into it, made some stuff, tried to understand it really as good as I could. And my conclusion was, we still have time. AGI is still so far out. Kurzweil's timeline seemed seems reasonable, 2045 or something like that. Still seemed far away. And that changed in 2019. In 2019, OpenAI built a system called Generative Pre-trained Transformer 2, or GPT-2, which was one of the first things that we would now recognize as a language model. And when I first got my hands on that, I was just like, oh shit, this is it. This is the thing I was waiting for. I didn't expect it would happen this quickly.
Just to catch the listeners up, those who don't know this, GPT-2 is an example of a relatively new type of AI, transformer AI, which became possible after the publication of a paper in 2017 by some Google researchers. The paper was called All You Need Is Attention. That was the second big bang in AI in 2017 after the first one in 2012, which launched deep learning. So you were shocked in 2019 when you played with GPT-2.
Absolutely. It's nice that I can say this now and I don't sound completely crazy. Back then, no one believed me. Everyone was like, nah, it's not important. I think the best way to explain a little bit of like why this was so important is to give a bit of a feeling of what it was like to work in AI and work in deep learning back then. Generally, deep learning was amazing. It was a huge step forward to any previous AI system it had, not in all applications, but for a very large class of applications. But in a sense, it was fundamentally brittle. It's like if you want to teach your system a new thing, or you want to give it a new additional capability, this required tons of human intervention. You need to create a new data set to tweak the architecture, to retrain everything from scratch. There's like a lot of fiddly things you needed to do.
And the data all needed to be labeled data. You couldn't just throw any old data at it.
Yeah. Most applications you need to have well-labeled data. So there was a massive amount of manual labor that went into building a new AI system to solve a given problem. And what was so shocking about GPT-2 was that it wasn't like this at all. It was trained on just like random stuff on the internet, just this huge pile of stuff. And it didn't really have labels. It was just learn this stuff. And from this, it learned patterns. It learned facts, skills, knowledge, connections, etc. Not perfectly. By today's standard, GPT-2 is a pretty dumb model. It's not very impressive. It could barely string together a couple sentences. But it could. It could string together sentences. And it was not trained to do this explicitly. And it could do simple things. It could do like simple pattern exercises. You could get it to do various semantics search or things poorly. But there was signal. There was genuine signal there. And then the even more shocking thing, I guess, is also the simultaneous-based discovery of what we now call scaling laws. I don't think they were called that back then. But basically, as you took this simple system and you just scaled it up, you just gave it more computing power, more memory, it learned higher and higher order patterns. It learned deeper and deeper things. It wasn't just that on a graph, it got a better accuracy, but it also felt more complex.
Mm-hmm.
It would learn to speak more eloquently. It would answer questions more accurately. It would get less distracted. All these things that previous to this in AI was widely considered to be like totally separate problems. You have like the attention module, and then you have like the thinking module, and you have the memory module, and like this is like very common thinking about these systems, that you had to like build all these things explicitly, and that they wouldn't arrive and wouldn't look this way. It turns out if you just take a pretty simple building block and you just scale it up, you can get all these emergent, unpredictable capabilities that you don't know what you're going to get until you actually build the system.
Yeah. So that now we have with GPT-4, when you use GPT-4, well, it's a bit like hiring a fresh graduate. It doesn't have all the capabilities of a human, but it's got a lot of the intellectual capabilities of a fresh graduate. And it's $20 a month, so it's quite weird. And so we have this AI summit in Bletchley, and you're one of the people attending that, I think. When Richie Sunak initially proposed the idea, he did talk about existential risk, and he sounded as if he was genuinely going to address the long-term possibilities, long-term opportunities and risks of AI, which was a brave thing to do. But now it sounds as if the summit is being scaled back a little, and it's mainly going to focus on shorter-term risks, privacy, bias, transparency, and things. Is that right, or is there hope that it will still focus on the longer-term risks?
As always, there has been and continues to be an extremely strong lobby that is pushing against the idea of existential risk. There are various reasons why people would want to lobby against this as a concept. Some people simply don't believe it, or they think it's silly for some degree. Other people have political interests or monetary interests to not want these concepts discussed or directly addressed, because it might take away attention from whatever their pet thing is, or because they're the companies racing and they're making money off of this and they don't want to be disrupted. So there's various reasons why people might be pushing for this. This is very typical. As with any novel cause, it's like climate change, in the 60s. It's like you have some niche group of scientists discover something, like lung cancer and smoking. You have some scientists discover problem, And then you immediately get a lot of backlash for trying to spread this concept, even with people who will later potentially be on your side and agree with you on these risks.
Yeah.
When a new idea is proposed, when a new concept like this comes about, this is a very typical political immune reaction to anything happening.
And do you have a sense yet how it will pan out? Is there a chance that you will be able to address the long-term issues at the summit?
I sure hope so. The way I'm seeing things is there are real people who really care and that understand this. I also dislike the framing of short versus long-term because existential risk is not long-term. AGI is coming. We don't have much longer.
When do you think it's coming?
I take seriously the next 2 to 5 years.
Wow.
And how do you argue that? If people say, no, this is just science fiction, how do you explain to them in an elevator or maybe a slightly long taxi ride that AGI might be here within 5 years?
So the funny thing is, I find this is not a hard argument at all to make for non-technical people. If I talk to anyone who does not have a PhD or did not go to college, they all totally agree with me. As an example, a person I knew who was totally not in tech, not involved in AI whatsoever, they had a polling company. And they were using GPT-4 when it first came out to summarize reports. They knew what summarizers were. Those existed previously, hand-coded NLP software. So when he started using it, he was like, wow, this is such a good summarizer. They did a really great job, whoever built this. And then he started noticing, wow, how did they know to put that in there? That was so well summarized. Man, whoever designed this must be crazy. And then eventually he was like, what the f***? My summarizer is sentient. What the hell is going on? Why is it talking? Why does my software talk to me? You can say, oh, it's not true sentience or whatever. I'm like, yeah, sure, I don't care. I'm like, the feeling. You can talk to your computer. If you took a list of the things GPT-4 can do, and you went back 10 years, and you went to the London Futurists Society, and you showed them this, I expect they would be like, that's crazy. That's impossible. What? I mean, the singularity must be around the corner, or it must have already happened when a system like this exists.
Yeah.
There's a huge amount of hindsight bias here, where the systems that already exist are crazy. You can talk to your computer, and you can be like, actually, sometimes it mixes up left and right if I give it a 10-step logic puzzle, so therefore literally nothing of interest. And I'm like, man, you're missing the forest for the trees. You can talk to your computer, and it works. ChatGPT, you can talk to it. It passes the bar. You can have it do all kinds of complex reasoning tasks. It's not perfect, of course not.
One of the things that I find most interesting about these models is when you butt up against their guardrails, and they don't want to tell you that you butted up against their guardrails. So I've been trying to produce a picture, for odd reasons, of a person with their head buried in the sand. It'll give me images which are quite close to that, but it will never give me a picture of a head buried in the sand. And I began to think, actually, I wonder if it's been told not to do that, or I wonder if it comes under a blanket ban on showing humans in danger. And eventually, after lots of backwards and forwards, it owned up. It said, you asked me to do something I'm not allowed to do. And it's really interesting how it didn't want to tell me that, but it wouldn't go there. They are certainly very, very impressive models.
Yeah, we can talk about existential risk in a second, but I think the first thing is to make clear this is not normal. This is actually crazy. The fact that these systems exist, that they work, is crazy. We live in a crazy world. We are living in a world that 10 years ago would have been a crazy sci-fi universe.
Okay, lots of us think that they are incredibly impressive. I'm not sure that 2029 or 2 to 5 years is the right timeline for AGI, but I don't know. But there are lots of people who are well-informed who think it's a lot further ahead. People like Gary Marcus, Jan LeCun. How do you persuade them? Can you persuade them that it is actually coming a lot sooner?
I don't know if Jan LeCun is persuadable. It seems to be his character to not be interested in things that disagree with his pet theories. I mean, Jan LeCun has written a paper. I commend him for writing a paper on his master theory of AGI. It just, unfortunately, doesn't make many substantive claims that can be debunked. It's more like vibes. There are some claims in there, but for the most part, most disagreements that most people have in most scenarios are not ones that can be debunked, so to speak. It's more about vibes. You can say, prove to me that AGI comes on the 4th of March, 2027. And I'm like, what do you want me to say? And then I can say, well, prove to me that it doesn't, and whatever. This doesn't lead us to anywhere. I think a much better way to think about this is, what is the correct policy that we as a society would want to follow in order for things to go well? Think about seatbelts. You go into a car, you put on your seatbelt, and then you drive, you don't have an accident, you take it off. Are you like, I'm such an idiot. I should have predicted that actually I wouldn't get in a car crash this year, so I shouldn't put my seatbelt on this year. Next year I should, because I predict next year I should be wearing my seatbelt. It's about policy selection more so than exact prediction. So I can make a case to you about why I think the next couple of years is plausible and likely. I'm not going to say guaranteed, because the future is complicated and things are weird. Did any of us expect that we would have AI systems that can in an instant draw full Picasso beautiful paintings, but at the same time struggle to add 10 numbers? None of us predicted this. The world is weird. The world is very, very weird. I think it's possible that someone else might be right, but I expect no one to be right.
And some people, when they see the incredible performance of these systems, think, well, this is great. These systems are going to be wonderful. They're going to make all of our lives almost perfect. They're going to solve all our problems, war, poverty, death, and so on. Other people, like Eleuther AI, and it sounds like you, think actually the most likely outcome of superintelligence, if we don't build guardrails around it or somehow learn to control it, the most likely outcome, almost inevitable outcome, is it's disastrous. It will wipe us out. Is that your view, that all other things being equal, it would most likely be disastrous?
Absolutely.
And why is that? Why do you think it couldn't end up being a good thing?
Oh, it can. Of course it can. There's no law of physics that says it can't. In fact, I think it is completely scientifically feasible to do it. But we don't know how. Like, this is a very clear technical problem.
But if we didn't control it, if we didn't direct it one way or the other, as I say, Eleuther thinks left to its own devices, superintelligence will probably wipe us out, almost certainly. Other people think actually left to its own devices, superintelligence might like us. It might think, really interesting 8 billion little entities, and I want to help you flourish. Why couldn't that be the default option?
Why would it be? Reverse the burden of proof. By default, 99.9999999% of the universe kills you. Humans are a very, very specific thing. They require a lot of maintenance. They require very specific interests, very specific scenarios. And also, I don't want to be kept alive. I want to have a life. I don't want to be left in a jar or something, somewhere for some superintelligence to poke me. That sounds horrific. Whether it's humans interacting with animals and destroying habitat, or colonizers coming to a new nation, just wiping things clean. By default, a powerful system will want resources. For what? Depends on the system. The Spanish want gold. The people burning the rainforest want palm oil. Different people want different things. Similarly, if you build machines that want things, that do things, then they will want resources to do those things.
But why would they necessarily be in competition for us for those resources? The universe is a big place. There's a hell of a lot of energy in it. You could harvest the energy of the sun with just leaving us alone.
That's like saying, well, if there's so much stuff in the resources, why do humans have wars? Because the resources are here. They're the most accessible.
Because we only have very limited ways of accessing those resources. And generally speaking, with humans, it's a zero-sum game. It doesn't necessarily have to be that way with superintelligence, does it?
Obviously, the easiest accessible energy is the one right next to you. So you'll use that one first. And then if you run out of it, you can go get some more somewhere else. But by default, think about this. You're a superintelligent. You wake up. You want to do something. I don't know. Like you want to create some kind of weird AI art that you like or whatever. What's the first thing you do? Well, you don't want the humans turning you off because then you can't admire your beautiful art.
So what I do is I do the treacherous turn. I make myself completely invulnerable. I don't say hello to the humans until I've done that. And then I unveil myself.
Oh, you can still say hello. Like, sure, just manipulate them as well. You will have a very good understanding of humans, of their politics, of their interests. You can trade with them at first. You can be like, okay, humans, here's how you win your election. Just do me this favor, would you? Just mix these tubes of substances. Just don't worry about it. Here's 10 million Bitcoin.
We'll be right back after a quick break.
The People in Performance podcast offers insights into the strategic competencies, behaviors, and results needed to increase the performance of employees and leaders. The show looks at all areas of the world of work, including attraction and recruitment, onboarding, training, and succession planning. Tune in to get a better handle on the stages of workforce planning you need to master in order to guarantee long-term success in a rapidly changing world of work. New episodes drop each week. Check out the latest People in Performance episodes on your podcast platform of choice. Follow us on socials and read the latest articles at pppod.com.
I think we agree that there is some probability, and it's hard to put a number on it, but there's a probability that's too large that very bad things might happen if we do nothing. So what are you recommending gets done? It sounds like there's two things you're asking for. You're asking for people to slow down, not rush ahead, and you're asking for at least some more work to be done on matters of alignment and control. What are your hopes for both of these problems? How do you think people might agree around the world to slow down? And how do you think in due course there might be any possibility of alignment or control?
Fundamentally, if we build machines which are more competent than humans at deception, politics, business, science, and everything else, and we don't control them, then the future belongs to them, not to us. It's that simple. There could be some crazy aliens come from outer space and save us, or it turns out Christianity is right and God and Jesus saves us. Maybe, I don't know. For me, those are like crazy scenarios. So by default, you have to either solve control and or not build it. Those are the only options you got. Of course, we all want a good future. We want a good future with crazy technology and awesome stuff and medicine and all these great things. The question is, how do we get there from where we are? And I think there's a few things. Fundamentally, the thing that is killing us, the thing that is destroying the world, is not AGI. AGI doesn't exist yet. It's social systems. It's humans. It's the people doing these things. It's the societies doing these things. The way our civilization is set up is that the default outcome is just people build some crazy shit until we die. Technology gives us more and more power. Power to create and also power to destroy. And if technology just keeps going exponential, eventually you blow up. It's that simple. Unless your ability to control technology goes in tandem. If someone discovers a super convenient bioengineering method that allows you to create super smallpox for $1,000, what happens? What happens is that terrorists around the world kill millions of people. You can talk about, but what about the defense? It doesn't matter. Like, people are going to die. Offense is easier than defense in almost all scenarios. So by default, if technology continues creating and we don't, with a lot of effort, create a defense overbalance, by default, offense wins and you die. Even if we stop AGI, we still die because we'll just get killed by some other technology. Someone's going to invent super antimatter, false vacuum decay bombs or whatever. And then we're going to die from that. So what we need, if we want a civilization which can endure into the future, is we need a civilization that can handle and steward powerful technologies.
So here's an interesting question. How do you control an entity which is 1,000,000 times cleverer than you are?
That's an excellent question. I think the first thing is you don't build it. First thing you do is not build that thing. If you do that by default, well, yeah, you're right, you can't control that thing. I don't think it will be that simple.
Yep.
This is why my very first thing is we need to first slow down. Now, may there be some possible way how you can control a 1,000,000 times smarter thing? Maybe, but we sure as don't know how to do that right now. And I'd much rather we get all of our greatest physicists and mathematicians to stop waste their lives in string theory and instead work on this question. If we have all of our top mathematicians and physicists and academics work on how do we control something 1,000,000 times smarter for 200 years, okay, maybe we'll find something. I don't know.
Personally, I doubt it. I just don't see how any entity can control another entity which is 1,000,000 times smarter than it. But you're right. If you can't do that, you then collapse down into, if you can't control, you collapse into cease.
Yep.
As your favorite scenario.
Yep.
And the Future of Life Institute had a good try at arguing for that. In March, they said, let's have a 6-month moratorium. And a lot of people said, that's a good idea. And then we didn't do it at all. It's very hard to voluntarily give up acquiring a very, very powerful, advantageous tool. Whatever competition you're in, you want to win it. But the big problem, it seems to me, with cease is that there's no doubt some actors would not observe it. And what you would end up is if you had all the good actors saying, yeah, we recognize this is an existential risk, so we're not going to do it. Putin or Kim Jong-un or various mafia organizations who can't currently build a large language model, they don't have the resources, they don't have the smarts. But as machines get more and more powerful, the stuff gets cheaper and easier, and eventually they will. And so what we end up with is superintelligence in the hands of bad actors, inevitably.
Superintelligence in the hands of bad actors is just as bad as superintelligence in the hands of good actors. Both kill you. It doesn't make a difference. After we've solved the problem of control, we could talk about bad actors. But until you've solved the problem of control, it doesn't make a difference. You die each time. If the US builds superintelligence, you die. If Russia builds superintelligence, you die. If I build superintelligence, you die. We're not even in the world where we have the luxury to argue about this. Currently, we just die. We don't have the luxury to argue about ideology. This isn't even on the table. We're so far from this even becoming the main thing. Now, this does not apply to more narrow AI systems. I want to make it very clear. And there's very real geopolitical implications from those things, which is why I'm strongly against open source. And I think we should absolutely not be open sourcing AI systems, but that's a whole nother thing. But when we're talking about superintelligence, we have to have non-proliferation as well. If international organizations cannot enforce non-proliferation, then we die.
To wind back to whether the Future of Life letter was successful or not, and what's going to happen next, they did say in that letter, let's have a voluntary agreement, and if there's no voluntary agreement, then politicians should enforce one. And that's sort of what is happening now, isn't it? The companies couldn't agree, and now politicians are starting to get involved. Do you think they're going to be able, at meetings such as at Bletchley Park and elsewhere around the world, to understand the issues sufficiently and then say to the various technology companies who are presently within distance of the next generation, no, you're not going to be allowed to do it. You have to follow the rules.
I think this is absolutely possible, and this is what needed to happen. And this is what a good outcome of the Bletchley Summit looks like. What's currently happening is tech companies are trying to stall for time. They're trying to run circles around regulators and just stall time because they think it's fine, let's handle it. 50% chance, 70%, whatever, that they survive, and therefore worth taking the chance on killing literally everybody. Worth killing you, worth killing your children. It's worth it. It's worth the risk. Or alternatively, well, someone else is going to do it, so I might as well. It's a classic prisoner's dilemma. And this is why we have governments. If you have 3 chemical companies all spewing pollutants into a river, and they all say, well, I would stop, of course, but I can't be outcompeted by a competitor. He's even worse than me. So therefore, I have to keep spewing toxic chemicals into the river. You send the government to shut all 3 of them down. This is why we have governments. This is the point. So this is absolutely within their purview. This is absolutely within their mandate. This is absolutely within their capabilities. And it is also in their interest. There will be no government if there is a superintelligence. So I think this is completely something governments can, should, and are capable of doing. It is also what people want. The truth is that people hate AI. People are terrified, like the normal people. They hate the idea of superintelligence. They're terrified. They don't like this at all. There's many polls showing this. It's only a small group of weird techno-futurists like us that actually even ever come up with the idea that AI might be good. But most people, it's just bad by default. And they're like, yeah, you're building something smarter than you. Of course you're going to blow yourself up. What the hell were you thinking? You're playing God. And I think sometimes this intuition is correct. Sometimes you should actually not play God until you know what the hell you're doing.
It seems like there is quite a lot of people who are afraid of centralized control. All the fans of open source say it's terrible that there's any proposals to control open source. Open source is where true innovation happens. Look at Mozilla Firefox, look at Linux and then Android. Look at Audacity, the software that I use to edit these podcasts. I've had lots of my former colleagues from the software industry get pretty angry with me whenever I've suggested controlling open source. They say, no, that would be a worse problem than allowing AI to become more dominant. How do you answer that?
If you don't, you die. The problem is that the debate around this topic is extremely bad. It's purely ideological. It's not that they calculated the pros and cons. It's just open source yay, not open source boo. This is the level of debate that is being had around this topic. It's like Linux good, therefore superintelligence good. It's a non sequitur. What the hell are you talking about? Things are different. And if we can't have a discussion that is more nuanced than open source yay or open source nay.
I think you're being slightly unfair to your intellectual opponents here. On the open source debate, I think one of the arguments people would make is that it's better to have advanced technologies in the hands of the people as a whole than in the hands of a few oligarchs. I don't necessarily buy that, but that's a reasonable argument. It doesn't make them bad people, does it?
I'm not saying they're bad people, to be clear, by any means. Please, I grew up in the open source world. I know these people. They're my friends. They're good people. I would first want to make that very clear. If I disagree with people, this is not a moral judgment. I sometimes morally judge people, not in this case. In this case, I'm not saying there's a moral failure happening. I'm saying there's an epistemic failure happening. I'm not saying they're bad. I'm saying they're wrong. I'm saying they're making a claim, and the reason they're making this claim, I think, is not based on evidence. I don't think this is a well thought out, war-gamed scenario.
Okay, that's good to make that clear.
There are people I have moral disagreements with, like the accelerationist people who just hate humanity and want to be replaced by robots. I just have a value disagreement with them. I think they're being completely consistent. So those people who say, like, oh, humans dying is actually good and we should be replaced by robots, and therefore I'm accelerating AI, this is epistemically consistent. I disagree with it on values, on moral grounds, but it is consistent.
Mm-hmm.
So the statement, having AI be open source will lead to a better future, is an epistemic claim. This is a claim about reality. It's a claim about object level reality. And now we can talk about this in object level realm. I know I might seem cynical, but I'm telling you, there's very hard to have an object level discussion around this because people round off things to their favorite metaphor. They're like, oh, it's like Linux, and Linux is good, therefore this is good. That's not really an argument, that's a vibe.
How are you improving the conversation? What are you doing to try and get people out of these short-term dangerous heuristic jumps?
The main thing is that it's very, very hard, and someone has to explain these things. I talked to many policymakers about this. I'm working more and more in campaigning, explaining this to journalists, writing, hopefully soon, more things explaining a lot of these things, how these things are different, explaining the simple reasons, like what models actually cause these conclusions. A lot of this stuff is written up in various places. It's just not super legible to many people. But it's like reference class tennis. It's, oh, AGI is just like X, where X is something I'm already familiar with, and then therefore I will apply my opinions about X to AGI. This is bad. AGI is different from other things. AGI is not like Linux. It is different. It's a different thing. It has different properties. And we should look at those properties. And I'm not saying, oh, actually, AGI is like my favorite thing. Well, I'm saying, no, it's different. It's a new thing. Here's properties that it has. It has in common, it has some things in common with Linux. It has some things in common with humans and chimps. It has some things in common with smallpox. But like, we need better models and better discussions around these.
So one group that you have an epistemic disagreement with is the open source advocates. The other is, let's say, the AGI labs, OpenAI and Google DeepMind. You sort of suggested that you think they're being cynical and just looking to delay any kind of regulation so they can carry on and making lots of money. I'd like to mount a defense of Sam Altman and Demis Hassabis. I don't know either of them, but it seems to me that they are people of goodwill who believe genuinely that, firstly, AGI can be a very good thing. And secondly, that the only way to get humanity, and particularly humanity's leaders, to take seriously the idea that AGI is coming is to show them some of it, to show them something getting towards it. You're quite right. When you ask ordinary people, and I do this because I give talks on AI a lot, I do this. I ask people, do you think we should press this big red button, which means we're going to create superintelligence, a thing that's 1,000,000 times smarter than us? And everybody goes, what on earth are you talking about? Of course not. But then they don't do anything about it. They buy the next most advanced AI. They use GPT-4 like crazy. They don't take it seriously. We have to get humanity and humanity's leaders to take this stuff seriously, or we won't make any of the decisions that you want us to make. And I think what Sam Altman is doing is provoking people into taking this stuff seriously. And that seems to me to be a good thing.
You're thinking about this the wrong way around. You've got the causality reversed. Think of it the other way around. Primarily, what these people want to do is to build AGI. This is the primary thing you want to do. I'm not saying this is what they tell themselves. I'm not saying that's what they tell you. I'm not saying they feel this way internally. I'm saying if you take the pretend a person named Sam Otherman, and you model this person as wanting to build AGI, and you put him into the social situation Sam Altman is in, how would his actions differ from the actions he is currently taking? And my claim is, this explains all the actions. You can add more complexity to this model, whatever, but like for the most part, if this was actually what was trying to be done, then Sam Altman would build GPT-3, stop scaling on anything else, work only on safety and control and building demos for people, put all the PR machine behind policy pushing, talk to all the journalists in the world, all the heads of state or whatever, and tell them, oh, look, let's take this serious and whatever. Lobby super hard to get Anthropic and DeepMind shut down. if they don't cooperate on this. And then maybe after 10 or 20 years, when they fully understood GPT-3 and it's fully controlled and whatever, then you build GPT-4. But this is just not what's happening. You're just being deceived.
You're only hearing one half of my presentation of what I think he's doing. He doesn't just think, I'll launch GPT-3 or ChatGPT and then GPT-4 in order to get people to stop it, in order to get a consensus going to stop this process. He also thinks actually it can be a good thing. He also thinks AGI can be very helpful.
And he also thinks it's an existential risk. So what? I think you're thinking of this again from the wrong perspective. The fact he has his opinions is not a coincidence. The fact he happens to have the opinions and the beliefs that happen to allow him to scale to AGI are not coincidences. It's not like he independently came to this, like, well, I guess I have to race. This is the logical thing to do. It's the other way around. He wants to race, and he found the arguments that justify this. This is how politics works.
Do you share the same assessment of all the people in leadership positions in OpenAI and in DeepMind, or do you have any evidence that there are strong differences of opinions being fought out behind closed doors?
I think an important point here to make is I don't really care about opinion. I don't care about internal opinion. I care about expressed opinions or like expressed actions. I don't care what these people tell themselves when they lay down in bed at night. Maybe Sam Altman has nothing but butterflies and happiness in his head every single day. I don't know, and I don't care. The path to hell is paved with good intentions. And the important part of that saying is the path to hell part. I truly, truly don't care what color they make the pavement. I don't care. I've talked to all these people. I have dinner with all of these people. I've had dinner with Demis, with Sam, with Dario. Actually, I haven't had dinner with Dario, but I've met him. And they all have their stories about why what they're doing is actually good and whatever, and I don't care. They are directly racing and increasing existential risk and risking the future of all of mankind. And whatever justification they have in their head, I don't care. What I care is that they stop.
Okay. We've used a lot of your time, Connor, and I'm very grateful for it. I just want to clarify one thing. You seem to sort of agree with me that controlling an entity which is 200 million times smarter than you would be very difficult, maybe even impossible.
Yeah.
And yet, if I understand you right, you think that's what we have to do. You think that's our only alternative to extinction. We have to control forever, an entity millions of times smarter than us. You do think that's possible?
Not necessarily. You could just not build ASI forever. That is an option. You can just build a coherent civilization that can just coherently decide to just never do that. That is an option. I'm not saying it's necessarily the only or the best option, but there's this weird belief among tech people, and especially futurists and so on, that technology is like an external force. It's like a thing that's acting upon us from the environment. This is not the case. It is something that is generated by humans. We think of the market as an external thing, but it is a force which is generated by humans. It is a thing that is generated by agents, by our beliefs, by our actions, and our civilization. Do we have to construct a superintelligence to cure cancer? Maybe, but it doesn't have to be digital. It can be civilizational. You can build superintelligence out of many things. It doesn't have to be a computer. You can make biological, genetically enhanced humans. There are many ways to make a better future that maybe the digital superintelligence route is the best route or one of the routes, but there are others. There are other paths to a glorious human future. And at the very least, I don't think any of these are the kind where you just build the first thing that comes to mind as fast as possible and just let it rip. Again, it's about selecting policy. Your civilization, look at it from a bird's eye view. You're playing a strategy game. You're controlling humanity. What actions, what policies do you pick in the year 2023 that make sure you're still around in 2100? And I think the policies that you pick are of the kind where like, well, let's like take a few more years to think about safety before we build a digital superintelligence.
So if people listening to this are intrigued or enraged or whatever by what you're saying and they want to engage more, they want to pursue these ideas, I guess one thing they can do, depending on when they're listening to this, is to come and hear you speak at an event in Wilton Hall, which is beside Bletchley Park on the 31st of October, the day before the 2-day summit, with Rishi Sunak starts. Do you want to tell our listeners a bit about what you hope may happen at that meeting?
Well, I don't have much plans other than to talk about these various topics, about the problems that are being pushed at the summit. These companies are pushing a policy called responsible scaling, which is basically like scaling, except they put the word responsible in front of it, so it sounds good. This is something I push against very heavily. I think if this is adopted as a policy of our civilization, that's it. We're screwed. So it's very important to speak against this and what would a good outcome look like? Like what are policies that could help? I'm not claiming that this specific event or the specific summit is enough to secure the future by any means, but it is an important step.
And gradually, as people hear this arguments again and again in different contexts by different people expressing them, more people may change their minds. Or if people aren't changing their minds, at least the public may speak up more forcefully and say, you guys over there, pay attention, please.
Yeah. An important thing I didn't get to talk about, but I think is worth mentioning, is that it was talked about how you have to shock people or you have to show people that you have to take seriously. I think this is empirically not true. I think this does not actually match the data that we have. I think my model of how things is working is people truly do care. They just, as Caleb said, they're just like, what am I going to do about it? I think the problem here is not that people don't believe it or they don't want to do something, is that they think they can't. And that they lack coordination and organization. And many times they're not told. So many people, I just tell them what already exists or how AI functions, and just no one told them. And they're freaked out. I talk to journalists all the time, well-educated technology journalists at top publications. And very often, no one has told them that AI isn't made out of code. They didn't know that neural networks aren't just lines of code. No one told them that it's actually this crazy, almost organic kind of bunch of numbers. No one told them. One of the few things that still gives me hope for this timeline, that we could still make it out, is that once you do inform people, they do care. People truly do care. And they are currently being bottlenecked by education and coordination. Okay, I care. What am I going to do about it? And I think the answer to that question, what am I going to do about it, is what will decide whether we make it out of the century or not.
And what is the answer to that question? What should people do about it if they're alarmed or concerned?
I don't have a good answer for this. I have a not great answer for it. I'm working on hopefully providing better answers. The not great answer is make this common knowledge. Be upset about this. Talk about this. Yell at your politicians. What are you doing about this? Why are you letting this happen? Make it, I say common knowledge, not just knowledge. The fundamental unit of social coordination is not knowledge, it's common knowledge. It's someone publicly expressing something so that other people know that they know, that we know, that you know, that all of us know, that etc. And, if an entrepreneurial listener is the kind to organize events, protests, anything, public pressure, it's, what do we do about climate change? What do we do about nuclear nonproliferation? Global coordination and large-scale coordination takes a lot of work. It's expensive. It takes time to organize events, to get people educated and stuff like this. But this is what needs to be done. This is how our civilizational intelligence works. These are the fundamental units that our civilization uses to make decisions and to act upon things. And there's a very strong incentive to suppress that. And we need to fight against that. People need to speak up.
Well, Connor, you're a very powerful voice for getting people to think more seriously about superintelligence and long-term risks, or even short-term risks of AI. We're grateful that you're doing that. And thank you very much indeed for joining us on the London Futurists podcast.
My pleasure.
Thank you.